In this episode, I'll finally be completing the Mission Style side tables, starting with the drawers and drawer pulls. Leftover material from previous parts of this project were actually the right size for all the drawer sides, so it just needed to be ripped to size. For the drawer fronts, 20mm material is used, so that required dressing, then resawing new material. A single pass at the thicknesser cleans up any of the resaw marks. Then it can be taken to the table saw to rip to width, then to length using the crosscut sled. Rather than having overly complex joinery for the drawers, I'm just going to dado and rebate it. The drawer front will look something like this with two largish rebates on the sides. The drawer side will then be glued and doweled into the side of it. And honestly, it's going to be good enough. These are going to be very occasionally used drawers, and they're going to hold up just fine. If you wish to go for dovetails, half blind dovetails, or box joins or something else, more power to you. But for me, it's sort of a level of complexity that I'm not really wanting to use that amount of time to do. In this case anyway. In the future that may change. So for me this is kind of the easiest path forward. Speaking of the easiest path forward, the easiest path to make those dados and rebates is here at the table saw using a crosscut sled and a dado stack. As you can see on my crosscut sleds, I have a dado stack capability. I can also do angles because these insert plates here are removable. That means I can get a nice zero clearance cut, so it has a few advantages over a miter gauge. You can obviously use a miter gauge, but a crosscut sled does have a few advantages. As the workpiece is riding on the sled, there's no additional friction when cutting that could cause the workpiece to skew. That's the main complaint I have with miter gauges. Anyway, back to this particular setup. I've got a sacrificial stop block. It's very slightly being cut into. And that's basically just how I'm going to cut the rebates. This is my test piece to make sure that everything fits. This rebate will be the width of the sides by the height of the side. So it's a 12 by 12 mil rebate into a 19 mil drawer front. So the sides will just fit in like that. This is the drawer front. So it'll be nice and secure, particularly when there's the brass dowels going through the sides. The backs of the drawers will attach with a dado rather than a rebate. They'll just go in like so. I made a sample test cut to make sure it fits. So if you just imagine this is the side, back will just slot in like so. With the rebates on the drawer fronts, for the sides, the dado there is easiest done on the crosscut sled with a dado stack. Obviously the same approach for router table, blah blah blah, will work as well. The stop has been moved from where it was flush up against this edge here for the rebate. It's been moved back about 10mm, and the dado stack itself is the exact same width. It's the same width as these side pieces, sorry, these back pieces, which creates a nice snug but not too snug dado. Notice the distinct piles of left and right halves. This is due to the joinery not being symmetrical from front to back. I have one of the drawers here. We've got the front, the two sides and the back. The back just slots into the dado, no problems there. That will need to be cut so that it just sits above the plywood panel. It won't receive a groove. That'll allow the plywood drawer bottom to just slide in and be removed as necessary if it gets damaged or needs to be replaced, whatever. The sides will go into the front in that rebate, but to add a little bit of strength and decoration, I'll be adding some brass pins in. These will be spaced out roughly like this, so they'll be visible when you pull out the drawer. And they'll be epoxied into the drawer front, which will provide an incredibly strong connection that will make it basically impossible for the drawer front to fall off the rest of the drawer box. Obviously we can't use wood glue on the brass pins, I'll be using epoxy. However, I'll be doing this in 2 stages. The drawer box will be glued up with hide glue. Then when that's dried, I will drill through and then epoxy in the brass pins. This will be a much easier, less stressful experience. If I need to do any correction to the drawers, I can do that before the brass goes in, so I can use hand planes. It'll generally be a much cleaner experience too, because of how nicely hide glue cleans up, but how not nicely the epoxy will clean up. I will drill through the sides first for the pins, then do the glue up. That way I can use the holes in the sides to act as a drill guide of sorts into the drawer front. The drawer backs get cut to the slightly narrower width just before glue up. Perhaps not required, but I'm sizing the end grain before glue up. This is the process of pasting on glue to the end grain, letting it soak in for about 10 minutes or so, then applying more glue and proceeding with the glue up. Using a simple V-block made from some plywood, I can cut the 6mm brass rod to the correct length using a hacksaw. But I'm lazy and a hacksaw is too much effort, so a porta band made much quicker work. The inner edge of the brass dowel gets a chamfer to make sure there is no burr that could cause it to bind in the hole and potentially split the wood. I'm using the last of the West Systems epoxy that I have, and it's measured out in a 5:1 ratio. Once the epoxy is cured, the brass can be filed down to the wood. For the handles, I wanted a hammered antique brass handle, but it was too expensive to have it shipped to Australia. My substitute is creating a hammered effect using Arbortex ball gouge in some hardwood offcuts. Ripping after carving gives me a very crisp edge. The drawer pulls can then be cut to find a width about 100mm. I don't want the drawer handles to just sit flush against the drawer. I want them to be extended out a little bit. So to that end, I want to add a stem to the back, like on this one. I could just glue it straight on, just getting the alignment and all of that could be a little bit tricky. So I want to create a very shallow mortise that the stem, for a lack of a better word, will then go into. Now I could route that stem at the router table, but I don't feel safe doing plunges on small pieces. I made up a very simple drilling template for my router that would guarantee the location and squareness of the 2 holes in every drill. A brass bushing on my router locates it in the template, then I can plunge all the way through. To actually install the pulls is a little bit of a complicated multi-step process, but it makes sense at least in my head. So I've got the 2 holes that were drilled using the router. They now have screws in them. These are temporary screws, so I'm using panhead screws rather than countersunk or flathead screws. They go all the way through and they will go into the stem piece. The stem piece is 15 by 12.7 millimeters, or 1/2 inch to match the groove here, plus I want to say slightly under 5/8. Doesn't really matter. This is going to be recessed. It's going to go into the mortise, lose a little bit of depth, so there'll be about 10 millimeter reveal, which matches the rest of the parts that have either a 5 or a 10 millimeter reveal. I'll screw in the stem piece, then tap on the drawer pull piece, then make sure everything all lines up how I like it, mark it all off, pull it apart, and then I can glue that up. With everything located, I could finally glue on the stems with hide glue. To get the colour that I wanted, I'm using Olivos Caldet in Ebony. A single coat isn't completely opaque, so some of the dark red from the jar comes through, adding to a sort of patina-like effect. Because of the wax content in the finish, I scraped off some of the excess where I wanted to glue on brass. This was easier than masking off the edges. To prepare the flat brass for glue up, it was sanded with 120 grit to add some texture for the glue to bond to, and the edges were broken with a file. As I ran out of epoxy hardener, I'm using Starbond's black CA glue. If any of it squeezes over, at least it's the right colour. Accelerator is used, so I didn't need clamps. So this is more or less done. I need to screw in the drawer pulls, I need to apply finish, the drawer bottoms need to be attached, nothing overly big. Just need to get the drawers working nicely. Now, I'd always intended to put some guides on the web frames. I just kind of forgot before I glued it up, and I could sort of do it now, but it's tricky to say the least because there's not enough room to get a clamp in there. And without guides, if you run into a situation like this where the drawer doesn't run smoothly, so unless you get it in the dead center, it catches and jams, and as you can see here, it's actually caught on the back frame. Fits in if you wiggle it around, but it's certainly not smooth. Plus there's nothing to stop it going out the other side. There'll be a back on the cabinet, so that'll stop it, but it's not necessarily the reveal that I wanted. What about this top drawer? It goes in smooth and stops exactly where I want it. And the way that I've achieved this is what I'm going to call accidentally smart. So from above you might actually be able to see what's going on. Because I can't attach anything to the sides of the web frames because I can't really glue them on, I've instead attached these 2 strips here. They're just temporarily clamped, but these act as guides. They're on the inside of the drawer, however they're underneath the groove where the plywood will go, so they won't interfere with the drawer at all, except for when it needs to interfere, which is pushing it out sideways so they travel smoothly, and it can also hit up against the front of the drawer to act as a stop. So what I need to do now is cut these down to just a little bit smaller, and I'm actually just going to screw them into the sides, not into the front. That'll give me a little bit of wriggle room for adjustability should anything go wrong, rather than gluing it in. And because I won't be screwing it into the front piece, it's no issue with grain orientation. There won't be any wood movement concerns. These runners, there's 12 of them, 6 drawers, each drawer has 2, just offcuts from the project. So there's no special dimensions for these, they just need to be a little bit shorter than the drawer. And the thickness is just thinner than whatever the leftover underneath the dado is. So I imagine it's about 6 millimeters. Yeah, about 5 millimeters. I didn't measure, I just went with whatever would fit underneath there. Pop a couple of screws in and have a great amount of adjustability. Very out of chronological order, the 6mm birch ply is cut down for the drawer bottoms and for the back of the cabinets. These were cut to fit, measuring directly from the dado and rebates rather than a set of measurements. so that the drawer actually will hold things. I need to put the plywood bottom in, which just slides in through the dado at the back, since the back of the drawer is a different height. The only tricky bit here is making sure that it goes into the dado in the drawer front. The easiest way is just to push up a little bit from underneath the drawer. It's more or less flush at the back, and it can be secured with just a single number 6 screw. Use larger, of course. Now that drawer bottom is not going to pull out, and it's nice and strong in that dado. And for the back panel, it's pretty much the same. Instead of going into a dado, it just goes into the rebate at the back of the cabinet. This is really just to keep dust out. It's not going to be visible at all, as this side is up against the wall. Just using some slightly longer number 8 screws straight into the web frames. To attach the top, I'm using Z clips that I cut the slots for before the glue up of the frame. I place the whole side table on the bench upside down. With everything roughly in place, I can use an awl to mark out where each clip goes, then drill a pilot hole. Then it's just a matter of putting the cabinet back on top and driving in some screws. It has been quite some time to get these done because life got in the way, but I'm very happy with the results. I'm very happy to have these off my workbench and take them inside so that we can use them. They've come out really nicely. I'm really happy with how the drawer pulls have come out. A little bit disappointed with how the stain didn't really contrast quite so well, because these panels were a more orangey colour anyway. That natural variation you get with timber can sometimes be super frustrating. If you are interested, there are plans in the description below. Thanks for watching.